Hello everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Marina Dawson and I'm the Marketing and Community Coordinator with Charity Village, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. As Canada's leading nonprofit career hub, Charity Village is committed to helping you find the best candidates for your job openings. And I think today's webinar is going to give you some really good tools to use in your everyday HR practices. For those of you who have attended our past webinars, welcome back. For those of you who are attending for the first time, we welcome you as well. And as always, please do feel free to connect with us at Charity Village after the webinar. We're always happy to chat and answer any questions you might have, whether it's about HR in general or the sector overall. A few housekeeping items before we get started. In order to have the best audio experience for everyone, we do have all of you on mute. This does minimize the amount of background noise that we hear on today's webinar. So this also means that while you'll be able to hear us speaking, we're not going to be able to hear you. So we have a session today that has lots of great information for you. We're going to have 2 very short question periods. So if you do have a question or comment during the session, please type it into the question box on the bottom of your GoTo control panel. That's located on the right side of your screen, and we'll do our best to address that in the short question and answer periods throughout the webinar. We'll also respond through the chat box to any technical questions that you might have, or if we notice any kind of issues happening, we'll make a broadcast announcement there as well. We'll be running a few polls today during today's session, so you'll have an opportunity to vote on your screen, and we do encourage you to join in with that. Now, I will say that technology, although it has its advantages, can also sometimes have a finicky side. So if you're experiencing a technical issue during the webinar that affects how you're seeing or hearing the presentation, do drop us a note via the questions box on your webinar control panel. Again, that's on the right side of your screen. We may also communicate with you there as well if we notice anything on our end that might affect your experience. For today's session, we're also going to be live tweeting with the hashtag CVWebinar on Twitter, so feel free to chime in there as well with your comments and questions. I'll also just quickly remind you that we're recording today's webinar, and we will provide this recording to each of you after the event, so there's no need to worry if you get called away during the session. The presentation slides and resources will also be made available to you after the event on our website, and we'll follow up with you with an email probably this afternoon or in the next day or two, and you'll be able to access the resources through there. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Denise Lloyd from Engaged HR. We're super happy to have you here with us today. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Marina. It's my pleasure to be here. Have been anxiously awaiting this presentation all summer, so it's great to finally have it here today and to have an opportunity to connect with everyone. So as you mentioned, we do have a lot of great content to go through today, and looking forward to having a chance to interact with people as we go through our different topics. So I'm just going to start out by just giving you a little bit of background on myself. As Maria says, my name is Denise Lloyd, and this is a picture of myself and my team. It's me on the far left. And my personal background is that I've worked in the nonprofit sector for 15 of my 20-year career. And I've been a people manager myself, and I've been advising people on the ins and outs of discipline and dismissal conversations for years. I've been in your shoes, and I have just a few stories from that experience to share with you today. My company, Engaged HR, was really started out of a passion for creating a different kind of workplace. And we have an opportunity to work with organizations all over the country where we're able to work with them on building a workplace where people are really happy to come to work every day. And as a human resources management consulting firm, we transform workplaces by providing the essential HR services, supports, and systems to nonprofits, and as well as some small and medium-sized businesses. We're solution-focused in our approach, and I think you'll find that in our presentation today, that it's about providing proactive and positive solutions for people. And we work with organizations of all shapes and sizes, and we've been through a lot of discipline conversations, dismissal conversations, and at the end of the day, it's really about providing people with peace of mind over what you need to do and how you're going to go about doing it. And that's my intention for you today. Once we finish the webinar, my goal is for you is that you feel that you have what you need to go forward into all kinds of difficult situations with confidence. And I hope that that's something that you're able to find for people as you go through, is confidence and feeling really good about what can be a very difficult situation. So we do have an agenda that we're going to follow today. So I do want to go through and have some discussion about why discipline happens and understanding the why behind it. We're going to take a look at 3 different phases to the discipline process. We will cover the transition from discipline to dismissal if that becomes a reality. I do want to talk about the difference between employees and volunteers. I realize some people on the call today are volunteer managers, and so I do want to make that distinction for you and have some discussion about that. I want to talk about next steps, and some of you might be on the call today with the intention of having a discipline conversation in the very near future, if not tomorrow. And so I do want to talk about how to implement some of what we talk about today as quickly and as soon as you may have a meeting tomorrow morning. And then, of course, we will leave time for questions and answers. So we are going to start with a poll just to give us a sense of where you're at. So I'm going to pass it back to Marina and have her pop up that poll.
Great. So everyone, you should be seeing the poll on your screen right now. So go ahead and vote there. What is your comfort level when having discipline conversations with employees or volunteers? So if you'd like to go ahead and put your responses in there, we'll just give it another second, let everybody have their say. And great. So Denise, you can see the results there. Looks pretty split.
Yeah. It does. Thanks, everyone, for responding to that. That's helpful for me to know sort of where you're at. And there are, I can understand the split between comfort levels because sometimes you go through some discipline conversations and they are comfortable, or you can be feeling comfortable with them because you have a real clear sense of, what's going on, what your needs are, and what you want from the person that you're having that conversation with. And sometimes they're uncomfortable, and that's for people, and that's because they're may be more emotional, or there may be a lack of clarity. You're not necessarily sure what you want the outcome to be or how the outcome is going to show itself in the course of the meeting. And so the goal, as I say, for today is to have you move up that scale a little bit. If you're already somewhat comfortable, then perhaps you'll be very comfortable by the time we're done today. And if you're not very comfortable, definitely you will be comfortable by the time you're done, because you'll have a clear sense at the end of today of how we're going to get through a discipline conversation that goes well and that has people at the end of it feeling like this is a good thing. And that is possible. So let's dive in and move on to our content. So we're going to take the deep dive here. Let's take a deep dive into discipline and dismissal. So why discipline? Why should you care about disciplining an employee or volunteers? Why is it important? And there's a number of consequences to inappropriate employee or volunteer behavior. And as a manager, whether manager of volunteers or a people manager for employees, it's important for you to manage the situation, and it protects other employees and volunteers. It protects your clients, the organization, and personally, your own personal performance. So when inappropriate employee or volunteer behavior negatively influences an organization, it shows up in a number of ways. It can show up in the reputation in the community, in your ability to secure funding, your client or customer relations, your volunteer program morale. A negative situation can impact employee morale, and it can also impact turnover. There's a lot of different scenarios of how you start to see inappropriate behavior from an employee or a volunteer negatively influencing your organization. And we've all seen the impact of non-action, when we don't actually take the steps we need to resolve the situation. And it's a bit of a slippery slope. You don't take action with one, suddenly things start to shift for a number of people, and now you have more and more discipline scenarios in front of you that you're having to deal with. So we're going to talk about 3 different phases to the discipline process. We're going to talk about setting it up for success, working the steps, and staying committed. So those are our 3 phases for today. In the first phase, we really want to focus on setting up for success. And that's really about creating the space for people to perform well and to make good decisions. Majority of the time, people have good intentions and they want to do a good job. That's what they're there to do. They want to do a good job. And the first phase of the discipline process is for you as a manager to take the steps necessary to create an environment where they know what it takes to do a good job, so that employees and volunteers are really clear on how they can perform well, behave well, make good choices, and be set up for success, not set up for failure. I'm sure we've all been in situations where we have felt that we've been set up to fail. It doesn't feel good. Nobody wants to do that to anybody else. We want to feel like I know what it takes to do a good job. I'm clear on what my roles and responsibilities are, and it's easy for me to make the right decision for performance. So let's talk about how to set someone up for success. And one of the ways to do that is through what's called positive discipline. So the best way to set them up for success is to tell them, the employee or the volunteer, what you need right from the beginning. And this is what positive discipline is. Positive discipline is about shifting the definition of discipline on its head. It isn't about negative reinforcement. It isn't about negative reactions to behavior. It's about positive reinforcement. And a lot of conversations I've had with managers and people have been that sometimes this is kind of similar to parenting. We want to see more of a good behavior and less of a bad behavior. And so the onus is on us to be clear about expectations. And it's a language thing. So we're going to talk about the language of it. So positive discipline is the process of orienting your employees or your volunteers to your work rules, your performance standards, and other organizational requirements so that they know what's expected of them. What are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to do it? And they know, and this is the trick, they also know the consequences that result from not following or meeting those expectations. The other piece is that this all occurs before there's a problem, before there's an inappropriate behavior. So it's a very proactive approach. Now, there are supporting tools that help you set accountability with an employee, that help you set expectations and show people what it is that you have needs from them. These tools are things like your vision, your mission, your values of your organization, having real clarity on how I'm contributing to those. Your job description, huge tool for setting expectations. Your performance review, this is where you have a meeting talking about what the expectation is and how someone's meeting or not meeting that expectation. You have a handbook for employees or volunteers or both that outlines expectations, outlines how to make good decisions. You also have a lot of face-to-face time, so you have meetings, you have conversations, maybe you have a mentoring program. These are all things that help you be really clear about what's expected. It's taking the surprise factor out for people so that they're not surprised by what they're supposed to do. Now, the purpose of positive discipline, the purpose of discipline in providing conversations that set expectations is to avoid problems before they occur. You're heading it off at the pass by being really clear about what's expected. You're providing employees and volunteers with information that they need to basically discipline themselves. They know if they're going to make a choice that takes them in a different direction of performance. They will start to know when it is that what they're about to do is probably not okay. And they make a choice about whether or not to take that step. So all of these things that you're doing, working through job descriptions, having a clear handbook, having clear policy, these are all things that hold employees or volunteers accountable. And that's the real crux of what I'm going to talk about today, which is how do you make sure that people know what's expected, and how do you then hold them accountable for doing what's expected? So when do you do this positive discipline thing? It's best to do it from the very beginning, right when you establish the relationship with people. As soon as you start orienting new employees or volunteers to your organization, right away you're orienting them to the expectations of the organization. You're orienting them to your vision, your mission, your values, your policy manual. your job description. You're orienting them to all of those things. You might also have to do it when you are orienting an employee or volunteer to a new work project or a new department. Sometimes employees or volunteers have been in a particular place inside the organization for a really long time. And maybe you have a 30-year volunteer. They've been around for a long time. And then they go and they do something new in a different area of the organization. They still need that discussion of what are the expectations of this role, of this department, of this team that you're joining. Because oftentimes what happens is we make assumptions when we move people that, well, they know. They've been here before. They've been here for years. They know what to do. And I know I've been in that situation where I've moved people into different roles and have forgotten that this is a new team. These are a new position or a new team or a new project, and they don't know. And so they make decisions with the wrong information or with not enough information. And suddenly things seem to go a little off the rails, and you're thinking, how did we end up here? You've been here for years. You know that this is not okay. But actually, it was okay before. In their new environment, it wasn't okay. And we never had that conversation. And so I've been in a few conversations that I thought were going to be about discipline, and in fact turned out to be more about understanding why we ended up where we did and making changes to fix it. And that it actually wasn't their fault, it was mine. And I needed to be more clear. I needed to not make assumptions. And we'll talk about those kinds of things. So the best time to use positive discipline is when you're setting and getting agreement on accountability. So you've set out your job description. You've talked about your policy. You've been really clear on what it takes to be successful in this organization. And then you get agreement on that. You also want to remind employees about your expectations as a supervisor on a regular basis. So at staff meetings, in performance management discussions, it's an ongoing thing. This is not a set it and forget it kind of a model. This is something that you're doing on an ongoing basis. And it's important for them to hear it and see it in a variety of different ways. The other time it's important to reinforce your expectations, to be proactive about problems, is if it's right after a major problem or a crisis has occurred. So something that has shifted and created a bit of an unsettling in the organization. It's good to reinforce and go back to what you know. Go back to setting those expectations, because that problem or crisis can be unsettling, and people need some grounding back in what is expected and grounding back in where they are. And that can make a huge difference for people recovering from a crisis or a problem and getting grounded back in what's my job and what's expected of me. Now, part of what also happens, and this is a little bit about what I talked about in terms of the realizing that sometimes it's not the employee's issue that's gone on, it's perhaps mine as a supervisor, is that you have what's called unwritten rules. So these are somewhat your culture of your organization, the kind of this is how we do things around here. And the expectation is that with employees and volunteers is that we follow the rules. The problems come up when the rules aren't clearly laid out. So what we have are unwritten rules, things that aren't actually written down anywhere, things that aren't really talked about. They're unspoken, they're unwritten. And an unwritten rule comes with unspoken expectations. So you haven't written down something, but it comes with an expectation that they're going to do it. So now you've set the person up for failure. You haven't written down what it is you want them to do, and you have an expectation that they're not going to meet. Oftentimes that ends up in a discipline conversation. So think about, for your organization, what kind of unspoken rules do you have? So here's a couple of examples. One is, don't just be on time, be early. Suddenly you have a person that you think is late all the time. They think they're on time because they got there on time. But in your mind, if they're not early, they're late. Well, it's time to talk about that stuff. That's probably not written down anywhere. Another unwritten rule that comes up a lot in organizations is you will do the job the way I would do it. So if I put my own spin on getting the job done, suddenly I'm not meeting expectations. But I had no idea that the expectation was I do it exactly the way you do it. Another one is ask permission, not forgiveness. So that one can come up where people think, well, I'll try it. And if I do it wrong, well, I'll just ask for forgiveness later. But in some organizations, that is not okay. And the only way to do it is to get permission first, to get approvals before you move forward. And forgiveness is not an option. So many times, discipline happens for all these different reasons. And it's important to acknowledge these unwritten rules in the organization and to focus on making them real for people. You know, I had a situation where I was recruiting for a nonprofit organization and helping them place a counselor into a family support program. And so counselor started, everything was great. I ran into her a couple months after she started her job, and she didn't seem that happy about her new role. And so I was asking her, well, what's going on? And she's like, well, I just don't feel like I'm fitting in. I just don't feel like things are really working, and I don't seem to be kind of meeting expectations. I feel like there's something under the surface that I'm not meeting, and I'm not sure what it is. So I asked her permission to talk to the executive director of the program, and she gave me that permission. So I had a conversation with her. And the executive director says, well, you know, I just don't feel like we're getting to know her very well, and I feel like some of her decisions don't really fit the organization. They're kind of not really what we would do normally. So we had a little bit more of a conversation about it, and what it turned out, as I dug into the conversation with the executive director, was that people in the organization were feeling like they weren't getting an opportunity to get to know this person. The counselor was not coming down for coffee at 10 a.m. when everyone gathered in the staff room for coffee. And so they didn't really feel like they were getting to know her. And as a result of not getting to know her, they weren't sharing with her unwritten rules. And so as a result, she wasn't meeting expectations. And the tensions were starting to build, and you could tell that discipline was probably not that far off from, you know, this counselor being told she wasn't meeting expectations. When I talked to the counselor about it, it turned out that between her 9 o'clock appointment and her 11 o'clock appointment, or 10 o'clock appointment, she had like a 10-minute break. She didn't have time to go to the coffee room. She doesn't drink coffee, so she didn't go make herself a coffee. And she needed a bit of space in between these 2 counseling appointments that could sometimes be rather intense. So it never occurred to her to go to the coffee room. Never occurred to her to get to know her staff member colleagues in that way. As a result, she was missing out on a lot of unwritten rules, building relationships, and they were judging her for not coming for coffee. So it seems like a rather innocuous thing. I'm not going to come and get together with you. But it was slowly starting to escalate into potentially a discipline conversation because she was missing out on some learning that she wasn't getting by not coming for coffee. Sometimes it's very subtle before you realize that there's things going on in the organization that are prompting us to consider discipline, when it's not always just the employee's behavior that's the issue. There's some things going on around the employee and around the situation that's unwritten and unspoken that is having an impact. So I tell you that to give you kind of a sense that this isn't always about the black and white cut and dried. Sometimes it's about the nuances of things, and that's where you need to look in a little deeper.
Denise, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in there for 1 second. We've had a few people report that we're having some sound issues, so I was just going to ask you if you would mind just speaking up a little bit, and hopefully everything's working well now.
Okay, sounds
Thank
good.
you so much.
Yeah, certainly let me know if it still continues. So the nuances that I was talking about, before you dive into disciplining an employee, it's important to ask yourself some questions. So some of them include, you know, have you spoken the unspoken? So have you examined whether there's any unwritten rules or unspoken expectations that the employee is not aware of? Have you identified with the employee the consequence of non-performance? So that's typically in your policy. So go back to your policies. Are they clear? Have you provided the information in a variety of different ways? So has it been provided in writing as well as through conversation? Have you received agreement from people that do they understand that this is what is expected of them, and have they agreed? And oftentimes, in conversations with managers, I'm told, well, yeah, we had a whole conversation in a staff meeting and no one said anything. Saying nothing isn't agreement. It's important for people to maybe paraphrase it back to you. What are you hearing me say? What do you think this looks like on a day-to-day basis? Get them to tell you what you think they're agreeing to, and so that you actually realize you are receiving agreement in that it's not just I'm going to say nothing and hope nobody asks me about this. And have you revisited your expectations often? So is it posted, or is it in their performance review? Are you having one-on-one discussions? Is this a part of your language? What I do work with organizations a lot, we talk about building a culture of accountability. And that means that it's inside lots of different conversations on how people can be accountable for their behaviors and their work, so that they are then, when you get into a conversation about how things aren't working, it's about really their accountabilities. So if you can honestly answer all those questions and you feel that you have done your part, then it really is about holding the person accountable for the work they have agreed to in the way that you have agreed to. And it really is all about accountability. So there's 7 steps to accountability. And we've gone through most of these, so I'm going to go through these quickly. The first is to clarify expectations of good performance. The second, explain consequences of poor performance. Provide specific feedback. And provide advice for improvement. If you see things are going well, talk about the things that are going well as much as you talk about things where you'd like to see some shifts in performance. And provide advice for improvement. So if you have some tips or a coaching kind of model that you want to take with people, help them see ways to find solutions. It doesn't help to say you're doing it wrong and not provide people with the opportunity to improve by saying, here's some suggestions on how you might do it better or differently or more successfully. Again, you're going to explain consequences if you have no improvement. You're going to monitor behavior and provide time to improve. Oftentimes, we wait. We wait to have these discipline conversations until we are just at the end of our rope and our patience is at the lowest it's ever been with someone. And so when you have a conversation, you finally have it, and then you expect immediate improvement. Sometimes you can expect immediate improvement depending on the severity of the situation. And sometimes you need to give them time. You need to give them time to try out different things and to see how they can improve differently. And you do need at times to take increasingly severe steps if there's no improvement. So you're praising when things go well, and you're taking, the necessary steps, which we're going to talk about in phase 2, to moving things along if they're not improving. So we have another poll question for you. So I'll pass it over to Marina, and you can pop up that second poll.
Excellent. So we have our second poll up here on the screen. What is the hardest thing about holding someone accountable? So if you'd like to go ahead and vote for the selection on your screen that resonates with you. And we'll just give people a little bit longer here to vote. The votes are definitely rolling in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree that there's, I see you guys are coming in with a third so far with it's a lot of work. And I agree, it is a lot of work. And part of what I have found in using a more positive discipline approach and holding people accountable is you're sharing the work with the employee. You're doing a level of work to prepare them, to share information, and then you're asking for them to work in partnership with you because accountability is their partner too. So the work actually starts to go down when you start to get into partnership around, can we hold you accountable on this? And then the employee or volunteer saying, yes, you can. Then it's, okay, so what does that look like? And how do we have ongoing conversations about, here's what you said you were going to do, are you doing it? And the weight of the work starts to be more of a shared approach and less of a, it's all on you as a manager responsible for making sure they perform. And it's, when things are unclear, it's actually more work than when you are clear about what are you going to do, what's expected, how are you going to get there. And of course, that evolves and changes over time. Everybody's workload goes up and down, and the clarity of what's expected goes up and down. And having those conversations becomes the important part so that your partner in this workload, the employee or the volunteer is your partner, and it's a shared responsibility. The other pieces in terms of, some of your fears, they may quit, they may get angry with me, the lack of clarity around what to hold them accountable for, those things are also, real fears. I understand those. And part of the anger management can come down to depersonalizing the situation so that as you're working with someone, it becomes about the work and less about their behavior. It becomes about the choices they made and then the option between the two choices they may have, and less about the you did this wrong kind of conversation, or you made a bad decision, or you're acting inappropriately. And so it allows you to start to depersonalize a bit and to get into more solution discussions, problem-solving discussions with people. How can we help you make this better versus you need to stop behaving the way you're behaving. So it changes the tone of the conversation a bit, which starts to alleviate some of the anger and starts to have people quit in an emotive way. So they just say, well, that's it, I'm out of here. Instead, if they choose to quit, it's with more of a intention. So it's this work doesn't work for me anymore, and I need to find other employment, and I'm going to leave in the future. Gives you time to repair. And it's not bad necessarily when people leave the organization. So, sometimes quitting's okay, but we don't want you to be stuck when they do. And it is possible to do it so that you're not stuck. All right, so let's move on to the next phase, working steps. Many of you will be familiar with the steps to discipline. They've been around a long time. They're probably written in your own policies inside your organization. There's a variety of steps, and you walk the steps one by one, and sometimes you skip steps, just depending on the severity of the situation. So the first is your verbal warning, sometimes called fireside chat. That might be dating me a bit. People may realize I've been in this business for way too long, because that's a back in the day term. They might not use that anymore. But it's an informal, let's just have a quick conversation about this and, just sort of plant some seeds that things need to shift a little bit in terms of performance. Then you have your written warning where things are signed off and placed on file. Sometimes you have probation where the person is still working. There are some nuances to the way you manage probation, and so it's not always a good step to take. Sometimes it's very appropriate, particularly if you've identified that someone has new learning to do. They have to learn something new. Let's give them some time to learn it and put them on probation while they learn it. If it's a probation just for the sake of make sure they see this as serious, that can sometimes backfire on you a little bit. So I would use the concept of probation a little bit carefully. Suspension happens in two ways, and this is an important distinction. Suspension can happen where it's the result of some discipline, so you're a result of an action. So an employee, is consistently not coming to work on time. You can suspend that employee without pay for a day, let's say, to acknowledge the fact that they need to improve their performance, they need to get to work on time. That suspension is designed for them to go away and figure out whatever it is that's stopping them from getting to work on time. And it would be without pay. Other times, suspension happens when the organization needs some time to think. And they need time to think without the employee being at work. And so you suspend the employee to create a break in the situation, to remove the employee from the workplace, and to think about what discipline you want to enact as a result of the behavior. Suspensions happens a lot if there's investigations, and you need time to figure out what you're going to do. In that case, you must suspend with pay, because you can't, it's kind of like double jeopardy. You can't be convicted of a crime twice. You can't serve the punishment of a crime twice. If you suspend an employee without pay while you are looking for what are we going to do, then you've essentially already penalized them. So they've received their punishment. And so if you don't know that that's what you want to do, you might want to terminate, you might want to send for training or something, then you would suspend with pay to give yourself time to think, bring them back into the organization, and then decide what the discipline is. The discipline might be suspension without pay. That's fine. You then suspend again without pay that time. So again, some nuances in some of the more serious levels of discipline, but also very manageable, and each of the steps do have a good role to play in the overall steps of discipline. And of course, your final step to discipline is termination. Your policy probably works through all of these different things and also indicates that steps can be skipped so that you're able to move directly to termination if you need to, depending on the severity of the situation. So it's always important to look at policy. Your policy is definitely relevant. So then you have a meeting. So that within phase 2, you're having your steps. You're always going to have a meeting when you're enacting discipline of some kind. And the meeting is when you really have an opportunity to connect with the person and to find out what's going on with them and to discuss why they might be struggling. It's an opportunity to learn from them, to share with them your perspective on what's happening, and then opportunity for you to talk about what you need from them to move forward and have things continue in a positive direction. This is where you make discussions, you have discussions about what choices they're making and why they're making those choices and why they decide not to follow the expectations or make the choices that seemed more appropriate or more apparent to them. This is where you can learn a lot about your own organization and some of the barriers that may exist to good performance, and where you can learn as a manager what you might need to do to help them improve their performance or do better. One of the resources that we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar is a handout, and it's called Preparing for a Discipline Meeting. And it walks you through all the different pieces of, or the steps, we'll say, of thinking you want to go through. How do you get your own clarity around what you want to say in the meeting, what you want as the outcome of the meeting, and how you want the meeting to go. And so it walks you through those steps and helps you prepare for those elements. And that'll be available for you, I believe, for download. So it's a nice little worksheet that helps you prepare for that discipline meeting. Here's some other things to think about when you're planning your meeting. Think about your time of day. So sometimes end of shift is best. Make sure you're planning at a time of day where if you are going to have a more difficult conversation, the employee or volunteer may be upset. Don't have them walk through, walk past the desks of 20 people to get to the washroom or to leave for the day. If you do it at the end of the day, then sometimes the office is not so busy and there's maybe only 5 people there, and it's a little easier for them to leave the meeting if they have been crying and you can tell that they don't look great. Not the outcome. The outcome you're going for is people leave feeling optimistic that this is going to improve, and sometimes they need a bit of space to get to that place. And so watching the time of day is important. As is being in a private area versus a public area, having a conversation in the middle of the cubicle area is not a good idea. You want to do this in an office. You want to watch for overly emotional times. So if there's been something going on in the organization, an employee has left, a well-loved employee has left the organization and it's been a bit emotional for people. Not the day to have a discipline discussion, but perhaps the next day would be better. So just, pay attention to what else is going on around you in the organization. If a project is close to ending, sometimes it's best to set expectations at the start of the next project. It all depends. Volunteers, this can be a little bit different for volunteers. It's sometimes easier to do it at the end of a project. The same with termination. Is it possible to do at the end of a project or event? Because it's difficult for other employees and volunteers as well to have sort of whatever's going on be a part of their project, particularly if you've got something that you're really moving, some big thing you're moving towards. You're holding an event and you've got 1,000 moving parts to make that event successful. You don't want to remove or throw your employee off kilter 2 days before that event if you don't need to. Sometimes you need to deal with something right in the moment, and sometimes you can wait, and it can be part of your debrief after. Always put your meetings in writing. So every discipline meeting requires documentation, or you have to start again, and that is so frustrating. So even verbal warnings get an email, and it's thanks for your time. It was great having a chat, and I just want to reiterate what we've agreed. Use a common, simple format and language. You want to make sure that you're setting out the date and who was there, what was discussed, all those kinds of things. But please don't get your lawyer to write this up for you. It'll be intimidating. It'll be scary. It'll be overly legal, and will put the person in a defensive place. Really, this is just a common format that you're using to document what happened and what was agreed to, and then you're getting it signed. So be sure to have the volunteer or the employee and yourself sign and give a copy of the letter to both people. The reason for that is that you don't want anyone to be surprised. You don't want anyone to be shocked as you move up the steps of discipline and to say things like, I didn't realize how serious this was. I didn't realize you meant it when you said these things. Putting it in writing makes it really clear for them, this is serious, and we mean it. And we want to work with you on improvement, but we do want you to take it seriously. And you don't want to surprise them down the line. So that's working the steps, where you're moving up through the different steps of the discipline process, you're holding your meetings, and you're putting things in writing. And you're really focused on that open communication, keeping things simple, and being really clear with people. So the phase 3 is staying committed. The importance of follow-up. I can't stress it enough. In order for the process to be effective, it does require you to be disciplined. And I get that this is where the work comes in and the feelings of it's a lot of work to do this. And the efforts that you put in will make a very positive difference on your organization. It's worth the effort. You need to be disciplined in the process, because otherwise it's a hamster wheel of going back over the same things over and over and over. If you're disciplined with your follow-up, you're able to move people along a process towards improvement or a process to moving them out of the organization. So you need to set meetings to check in, and you need to keep those meetings. I've had lots of conversations with managers who've said, we had good intentions, we scheduled it once a week or once a month, and but things got in the way and they stopped happening. And the employee then stopped getting feedback. They stopped understanding whether what they were doing was good or not good. Was it helpful or not helpful? The employee started to slip back into old ways because they were no longer getting that feedback that said, this is what we're looking for. And so the feedback meetings are where you're able to be both formal and informal with your feedback. You're able to tell them how they're doing and keep doing the good things, and here's some things that need to be improved. Give them the feedback, and they will start to see some shifts, or they'll start to really get the message that you're really serious about this, and they'll make decisions about whether or not that works for them. And then that helps you down the line as you move into your decision process. So the follow-up component, can't stress it enough, as I say, you really need to be disciplined on this piece. And it's one of the most critical steps to the 3 phases. So we do have some time set aside for conversations or questions at this point. Marina, do you have anything that you want to bring up at this point?
Yes, we've got quite a few questions coming in, and so I'm going to pick out some of the ones that I think we're going to be able to answer today. First up, Denise, are there any differences in managing these discipline processes with different employees of different generations?
Well, I think that different generations have a different need for clarity and perhaps different tools. So for some, a younger generation might be okay with email feedback. They don't need an in-person meeting, perhaps. The odd email that says, this is going great, thanks very much, or, this was great, and here's what needs to improve, is fine. With the older generation, baby boomers and up, I would say that you're probably going to want to do some face-to-face time. And so your feedback would be better off in a sit-down over a cup of coffee, if you can, or at least drop by their cubicle or drop by them, as they're working in their volunteer area, that some face-to-face time would be important.
Excellent. And I think you're going to get into this a little bit later as well, but what would you highlight at this point as being the main differences in this process between working with employees versus volunteers, since we do have a lot of volunteer managers on the line today?
Right. We are going to talk a little bit about that before we close, so I won't say too much about that at this point, other than the important distinction in your volunteer program is you need to decide if you are going to have steps to your discipline process, and if you are, what steps do you want to have? And that's a moral obligation for you and your organization, a policy decision in your organization. You are not legally required to have a progressive discipline process. Employment situations is a bit different. There is a legal expectation that you do some level of steps to your discipline process. Volunteer programs do not have that same requirement, and so you need to just make a conscious policy decision on how many chances or how many steps are you going to give a volunteer, and that would be the biggest difference.
Excellent.
But we will talk a little bit more about that as well. So.
That's great. I have one other quick question that might be coming up for a few people with regarding to arranging the follow-up that you're talking about. What sort of timeline should you have in place on this? How long should you be waiting to do different types of follow-up on the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on a few things. One, how the severity of the discipline and how quickly you're expecting a change. So sometimes it's some of your discipline conversations might be more about style of how someone is, the style and how they're doing something, or their attitude as they do it. And it's not so much about what they're doing. They're still doing the task, but the way that they're doing it isn't really appropriate or not fitting for the organization. In those cases, you would probably have meetings sooner than later because you need to give more in-the-moment, more timely feedback. In other situations, you might, so something like that might be like weekly. In other situations, you might have, it's more about the what they're doing, their tasks that they're responsible for, maybe there's some errors that they're making, or there's, a consistently off the mark on, maybe they're writing press releases for you, and their press releases aren't going that well, and that's something they do once a month. Well, then your meetings might only be monthly because, it's timed with how things are going, or maybe they work in accounting, and you're into a monthly schedule with them. So it really depends on the work, the kind of discipline you're doing. You need to be reasonable. You need to give them a reasonable amount of time to improve. And, you need to be realistic about how often can you spend meeting with someone and what's reasonable to meet. I would say weekly is the most often.
Fantastic. That's great. Thanks, Denise.
Okay. So just as we get into the final minutes here, let's move in and talk about how you get into considering your options around moving from discipline into dismissal. So your situation's not approving, what do you do? So consider whether or not it's an option to redefine your definition of good performance. Maybe the job is unrealistic, or the client group warrants the kind of behavior you're seeing. So do some of your own analysis around the work and the job and the person. It's not always the person that's the problem. Sometimes there's systemic things that are making it difficult for them. Sometimes everything is fine and it's the person. So you just need to go through a conscious thinking process around that. Would the employee or volunteer benefit from some training? Maybe this is a training issue, and so if you were to do some training, performance improvement would come right away. Is there a better role for the person somewhere else in the organization? Now, I say this carefully because I don't want people to think that this is about passing the buck. And it's like, oh, well, this person's not working so great for me, but if I move them to that department over there, well, let them deal with it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there a better way to align the skills of the person with the responsibilities of a job that happened in the organization? So do you have, for example, a person who is who has a job, the job they're to do is to be really, really detail-oriented, and it's really important for them not to make errors in detail. Maybe they're doing your stats or something like that. And yet when you really look at the person, you realize that they're a creative, spontaneous person who detail is the last thing on their skill set. Well, there's a mismatch there between the job you have and the person you have in the job. Whether it's employment or a volunteer unpaid job. And so is there a better way to align their skills? Maybe they'd be better off running your art program than they are doing your stats in the administration department. How can you take a look at their skills and make sure that you've got a good alignment going on? And finally, is the organization willing to allow the situation to continue without modifications? This is where your decision comes in. You need to decide if you're going to continue to the discipline process and work towards improvement, or if it's time to end the relationship in some way. So we have another poll question for you. And I'm just going to pass that back to Marina. I'm just...
you know what, Denise, I don't think we do. Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
So maybe we can just talk about that one quickly.
Yeah, and so really what I wanted to point out here was that really your decision-making process with employees or volunteers is actually very similar, and that you need to make a decision and you need to look at the causes of why you would move into a into a dismissal conversation versus discipline. It's really the same, and lots of people feel like you can't fire volunteers, and so that's why I wanted to talk about there's a lot of things that can go on with volunteers that are the very same reasons why you would consider termination of a volunteer as much as you would consider termination of an employee. And so some of the things you want to think about as you get into the causes is if that individual is having a continued inability to meet the job standards after appropriate training, if there's repeated violations of policy, procedures, work rules, even after you've had ongoing discussions about it. And of course, there are the serious one-time violations of work rules, which means you can move directly to termination. So things like theft, like violence, things that are completely outside the expectations of the organization and completely inappropriate, you can move very quickly into a termination discussion versus discipline. So there are some legal considerations I want you to know about. We're not going to get into them in any great detail, but I wanted you to know that these are on your radar. One is your organizational policy. What do you say about discipline and termination in your policy manual? What do your employment contracts say around termination? Is there notice periods or any kind of clauses in an employment contract that outlines what happens if termination is to occur? If you have a collective agreement, what does it say about termination? You need to consider your provincial employment standards. So those will talk about severance, notice periods, those kinds of things. You'll want to consult those, and you can find all of those online. And of course, you want to consider any precedent that's happened inside your organization. So you want to be consistent, but also consistent on good practice. So if you've got precedent that you can follow, it's important to know what that is. Sometimes you make choices to go against precedent, but it's a conscious choice, and it's not something that you find out about after the fact. Obviously, as you go into any of your steps for termination, you're going to go through the same 7 steps when you're holding someone accountable. So you're going to walk through the discipline process. Now you're into termination, so now you're going to think about your meeting. What does your meeting look like? What kinds of documentation do you want to have available for yourself at that meeting? Those kinds of things. You do want to include your supervisor or your executive director, depending on your organizational policy, in your meeting so that both you have this support in that meeting. The employee or volunteer has the opportunity to ask beyond yourself any questions that they might have. And it also is a big step for an organization to get into a termination situation, and probably not something that is within the authority of most managers, and they would need their executive director or their own supervisor involved. With the exception perhaps of volunteers, sometimes volunteer managers can remove a volunteer from a program without an executive director. So again, it comes down to your organizational policy and knowing what that is. And anything that you're doing, it's important to maintain the relationship and the dignity of everybody involved. And so the more planning that you do, the more, that's where the discipline meeting handout will be helpful for you. That's a really good planning tool as well for if you're considering termination. It helps you think it through, helps you come to a good message of what you want to say, and it helps you get to a place of clarity, and so that you can bring that clarity into the meeting with you. So some things to remember in summary that what we talked about. One is to depersonalize things where you can. So this is not about, this is about the fact the employee or volunteer has not followed through on their accountabilities. This is not about them being a bad person or being intentionally malicious or doing things with bad intention. This is really about, we set out accountabilities and we set out the way that we manage people, the way we talk to people, the way we behave in organizations, and we're not seeing that behavior from you or that performance on these tasks. So it's about, you agreed, the agreement hasn't followed through. Obviously, there are times when you can't depersonalize it to as much as you would like to. The goal is to depersonalize where you can, to try and remove some of that, having people take it personally in the conversation. Now, throughout this, I've talked about to consider the organization's level of responsibility for any role it's played in things not working out. And really, that's so that you can learn from the situation. You can make improvements going forward. It may not solve the problem of that moment itself, but it does give you time to learn from whatever's gone on. Keep things simple and short. Don't get into he said, she said debates. Those are really hard to move forward from. And there is a handout that we've provided for people called a departure checklist. And what that is it's a checklist of all the different things you need to consider when someone's leaving your organization. And this gives you a really good tip sheet on all the different kinds of things you need to take into account as you work through your plan. So we have talked about this a little bit already, the employees and volunteers. So this is really talking about the difference between the legal obligations you have to employees that do not apply to volunteers. So Employment Standards Act doesn't apply. Collective agreement doesn't apply. Employment contracts don't apply. What do apply are your policies and your moral obligations. So you may not be legally required to provide a number of steps in a discipline process for volunteers, but you might want to as part of your policy. You might want to give them an opportunity to improve over time. And so that's where your moral obligation comes in from a volunteer program point of view. But you have very little legal obligation to volunteers that you do have for employees. And that was what we talked about with the question, but also the legal considerations. So let's say you have a meeting tomorrow, and you may feel overwhelmed with all the things that I've talked about today and what it takes to create that culture of accountability that we talked about. But really, I want you to know that you can start small. If you don't feel like you've done the things in your organization that we've talked about today, then tomorrow, if you have a meeting tomorrow, then this is your opportunity to do the very first step and to start small. So if you don't have a job description, then write out 2 or 3 duties that you have as expectations and have a conversation with your employee in this meeting right now. And outline not just the what, but the how that you expect them to do. Be clear about your expectations from tomorrow onwards. And it'll allow you to address some of the situations that come up around attitude and style if you focus the meeting on setting expectations. Use your meeting tomorrow to get agreement on accountabilities. It's the same as if you had all that stuff already and now we're getting agreement on accountabilities. You can start that tomorrow by setting out one accountability and getting agreement on that accountability. Document your meeting and stay focused on your follow-up. You can have that discipline process be successful even if you haven't done any of the things that we've talked about so far when you sit down to meet with your employee or your volunteer tomorrow. But it does start with something. So start with a small step by setting accountability on 1 or 2 things that you want to see differently from that person. And then from there, you can then move forward with the proper process in terms of getting agreement, documentation, and follow-up. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. And we've been discussing a potentially emotional and stressful topic. And so as a result, I'd like to leave you with a tool that I think can make a very positive difference in your organization and can take away some of the overwhelm that you might be feeling about how to create an environment where people can be productive, make good decisions, be accountable, those kinds of things. So as a thank you for joining us today, I wanted to provide you with a free gift. My report, it's called Engage Your Employees, 101 Strategies That Motivate for Peak Performance. This report provides 101 different examples of the kinds of things you can do in your workplace that will support, encourage, and motivate your employees and your volunteers. And they really create the kind of environment where employees make the right choices and they make the right decisions, and it creates an environment where people actually want to be held accountable. And so the examples are low cost, they're easy to implement, and they're going to have a high impact on your employees and on the culture of the organization. So if you go to 101strategies.com/charityvillage, you can download the free report. And when you do that, what will happen is you'll be offered a 30-minute free consultation with me as well if you have any conversations that you need to have to get ready for some discipline, or if you have anything that you want to talk about within the HR services of your organization, then that's a great opportunity to do that. And lots of people really walk away from those calls feeling like really clear on their next steps and the actions they want to take. So if you go to 101strategies.com/charityvillage, then you'll be able to download that. Now, I know we were going to leave some time for questions. I'm not sure, Marina, we don't have a lot of time, but I am certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have.
That's great. Thanks, Denise. We are going to just stay on the line, I think, for a couple of minutes because we have some really good questions that have come through. I'll start with this one. How do you deal with discipline in a very small nonprofit that has maybe 3 to 4 employees and where people are working very closely together? How do you maintain discipline when there's an overly familiar team dynamic?
So the important piece there's 2 things. One is to have that one-on-one discussion with the person and come to agreement with that individual on what the expectations are and get agreement on the accountabilities. In really small organizations, it's really important to look at, are there any barriers to them achieving that expectation? And sometimes it's important as a group to look at how do we remove a barrier. So sometimes group brainstorming in those cases can help. If you can depersonalize the situation and look at it from organizationally, we have this issue, whatever it might be. So it's communications or something's going on. If you can depersonalize it and then have a group brainstorm on how do we solve the problem without it being attributed to one person as being a problem, then you get buy-in from everyone because they're going to talk about it anyway. And so controlling it, I say that in quotes, like managing the communication can be helpful by doing it as a group.
Excellent. And Denise, what are your thoughts on managing termination without just cause?
So that's where you really need to watch your legal considerations around your notice period, any legal requirements for severance that might exist in your province or in common law. Most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, you are terminating without cause. And so you have to follow notice periods and severance law, and you really want to, perhaps make good faith payments. It just depends on the situation, but most of the time you are terminating without cause. So you really want to look at both your policy as well as the legal side. And sometimes that means talking to an HR consultant who can give you some advice on that. Sometimes it means talking to an employment lawyer and getting some advice on that side of it, because for terminations without cause, there can be some financial implications.
Great. And just for our volunteer managers, we've had another volunteer question come in. When you're looking at doing a discipline process or a termination process with a volunteer, do you have any suggestions for language that can help soften that a little bit for them and perhaps encourage them to continue volunteering and not leave them with kind of a bad experience on volunteering?
Yeah, taking a look at why the volunteer experience hasn't worked. And sometimes it's, you have conversations with volunteers and you realize that they're just as happy to reconsider their volunteer options as you are in having that conversation, because it's not working for them either. A lot of times when you get into conversations with volunteers, when it's not working, it hasn't been working for them. And that's why it's not working. So everybody's kind of been suffering through this little bit of a misery thing, but nobody wants to talk about it. And that's because the volunteer doesn't want to not give to you. They're there out of the goodness of their heart. They have good intentions. They want to support the organization. They don't know how to say, I don't want to do this anymore, or this isn't working for me, because it can feel selfish. And so having the conversation and looking for what's really not working, what would work, and then looking for, is there a way for us to find what would work? And maybe there is and maybe there isn't. But it's focusing on the what is the best parts of what you're getting from the volunteer, how can you keep the best parts, and still have them have an opportunity to contribute those best parts, and then find the things that aren't working and find ways to remove them from whatever they're responsible for.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Denise, for such an informative session today. There was so much info there, and I think I've already heard from Twitter a number of people saying they're going to be walking away and implementing some of this right away. So that's wonderful. I'd like to thank all of our participants for joining in today. It's been wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for your wonderful questions and for participating in those polls as well. Before you sign off, I just want to remind you all that we will send out the information on how to access the recording, the slide deck, the downloadable tools that were mentioned in today's session, and we'll also send along a little survey about today's webinar. So you should receive that either this afternoon or within the next day or two. And of course, if there's anything else that Charity Village can do to assist you with your recruitment needs, do get in touch. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will say goodbye for now.